Welcome everybody to this live streamed Interintellect Salon. People are still arriving, so there will be some shifting around on the screen if you're watching us online. This salon kind of came out of a question that is very important to me, which is what the hell is going on with language? I feel like we're spending our entire lives reading all day. Even if you're not a book reader, you are feeding yourself with text messages, tweets, blog posts, Substack posts, newsletters, letters. And for those of us who do this as a habit, we'll find that something has been shifting around language. And when I notice that, I always want to talk to writers. I want to talk to the people responsible for this shift because they don't just know it intimately and are there in the kind of first row seeing how it unfolds, but they also create the new language. And so when we are talking about changing public discourse, changing public political language, I always want to bring together people from two sides. I know it's very complicated these days, but still to this day, if you know Armand Domalevsky's work, you know that he is coming in from the left. In fact, he is the co-founder of YIMBY Democrats for Africa, just to like really clarify this. I think in Richard Hanania's case, this is a little bit more complicated, even more complicated than the average complications today. I'm sure many of you are intimately familiar with Richard's work. You showed up, so the selection is there. Richard is the president of the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, and wrote an excellent book that was published in 2023, The Origins of Woke: Civil Rights, Law, Corporate America, and the Triumph of Identity Politics. And for those of you who are not familiar with Richard's work, he was not celebrating the triumph of identity politics in this particular book. And I'm sure he will say some more about that. What I love about these two creators is that they are unabashedly themselves, and they hold some very complicated thoughts together in their heads that maybe in traditional media would not have fit into one commentary career. So we will investigate how did they arrive there, what happened, and generally what's going on in our internet world, which is basically the world today. I'm a millennial. I came of age during the advent of social media and the past 15 years when we saw a lot of traditional forms of authority, respect or reverence for expertise, and the trust and reach of kind of old-fashioned journalism weaken. We also saw a lot of fringe movements gain a foothold. One very interesting one is what Richard very often writes about, is how the kind of elite liberal authority embraced previously fringe identity politics and their terminologies. But we also saw online new right movements become much more important in certain parts of academia, in some journalistic outlets, and today, obviously, in mainstream politics. But we also see other linguistic changes. One that's very interesting to me as a startup founder is obviously the startup language appearing in how we talk about work, how we talk about vocation, how we talk about, well, institutions and mainstream politics today. So we will try to like trace back these processes to figure out where we are today and whether words even mean anything. So how I'm going to run this is for about 20 minutes. I will chat with Armand and Richard, and I will let them chat with each other as well and debate some of their ideas off of each other. And then we will open to the audience. You will be able to raise your hands. And if you don't want to do that, you can share your questions in Zoom. You can either read it up if you get picked with your question, or we can also just read up anonymously what you enter there. Just please indicate somehow in your Zoom chat which one is your preference. And as always, I would love to give Richard and Armand some time here to just like tell us how they became online commentators. What was the process? And we can't talk about how the world got to where it is without discussing first what about the people. So Richard, the floor is yours first, and I will give the mic to Armand.
Yeah, so I was an academic for most of my adulthood. In 2018, I had a research fellowship and I started tweeting around that time. it was 2000, yeah, 2018. I was just tweeting. Did that for like a year or two. Um, got a little bit of a following on Twitter, but then I think in 2021 I started Substack, and Substack had become a little bit of a thing during the pandemic, and I started writing articles, and they got a lot of attention. And then I just kept doing that. Yeah, that's basically it. I didn't really think I would be able to write for a living beforehand. I did start my own think tank. That I thought I would build that. And I was working for other think tanks too, during that time. And maybe I was going to do that rather than academia. I was sort of annoyed with academia, at that time. But then like the time put into writing and tweeting was just better than time put into anything else. And yeah, that was around 2021, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
What was the pivotal moment for you when you started feeling that what you had been taught, maybe at university, of how to be a public intellectual was no longer valid and your words got a better?
That's not what they teach you at a university.
No,
No, no, an
no,
American
no, but the
academic.
university's existence kind of bestows upon us these notions, no, through our professors, through the people we
Sort
read.
of, yes. So that they don't actually, they dislike if you give the impression that you just want to be like a media figure, they really won't like that. So that's something you hide or you do later. I don't know if that's changed. It was like that at least when I was in academia like a decade ago. It's probably still largely the same. But the problem with academia is I tried to do some kind of, I was studying political science. I tried to do some kind of broad analysis, like big questions, like why does the number of wars increase or decline, or like how are conservatives and liberals different? And you couldn't do that in academia, really. You could maybe, but you would basically be really, really encouraged to have a very narrow kind of hypothesis and test it and write a paper or write something about that. It was very narrow. And I didn't like that. I had kind of broad, ideas about the world. It involved synthesizing a lot of different ideas and maybe taking ideas that I was convinced were right from other fields, maybe that were even controversial. Um, and putting them together. And you can't do that. You can't write like the really good essays that I wrote as an academic, in like an academic journal or something like that. So yeah, you are, it is a place for people who want kind of just, if you're studying the social sciences, usually, there's some people who do good work, but usually the best work is, and the worst work too. It's all just kind of narrowly focused. You're trying to tell people a story about one thing. And I wanted to tell stories about a lot of things, and things that were actually important, and even if the empirical methods we had weren't the best for understanding a question, sometimes, so what, we've got to find a way to kind of figure out and have something to say. And so yeah, I mean, there's all these problems with academia. I mean, it's just kind of the wokeness and the idea that that you would publish in a peer-reviewed journal and you would wait for 6 months or a year before it's out, and like they always had to be a standard length, and you had all these stupid citations that don't matter. There's all those problems too, but I think the narrowness of kind of how you are forced to approach intellectual questions was something that really turned me away from it, turned me into writing for the public. And like, you want people to read your stuff too, and nobody's reading your stuff as an academic. And also, yeah, it's also kind of a very hierarchical thing, because it takes a very long time to kind of build your reputation. When if you're good on the internet, even if you're not good, if you're somehow lucky, or somehow you have some kind of you have something to say, or so you do something that appeals to a large audience, it'll get out there. And so yeah, that's how I realized it was just not for me.
It's so interesting. I have a little bit of a similar experience, having spent the first 30 years of my life in Hungarian, basically. I mean, I wrote a lot in English, but I was in Budapest, and you have this limitation that you can be very brilliant and publish to a wide audience locally, but it's still only available locally. and there's this broadening when you start writing in the lingua franca. So I can kind of compare myself to that experience. And I'm really curious. I mean, for me, starting to write in a language that is really accessible to nearly everybody in the world, that was not just a liberation or a loss of a kind of restriction, but it also changed my voice and changed how I think. Did you experience anything similar when you started writing to the public? Did you arrive with your voice already forged in the academic?
Well, tell me maybe first what you mean. How did you start to think differently when you wrote in English?
I think it's very simple. I think when you're allowed to reach a broader audience and you're allowed to speak more freely, whether that's geographically or in terms of politics, in terms of ideas, you start thinking more freely. I think these two things are very, very, very related.
Mm.
And I'm really, I mean, we know great authors, who wrote very freely during eras of censorship, but they usually first became very free-thinking people, and then they were somehow placed under oppression, under censorship, and they just managed to retain their voices. I think when you're opening, and you change because you're allowed to experiment with ideas publicly. You're allowed to, I mean, people are allowed to respond to you. We will spend some time during the salon talking about what happens with the commenters and the response, right? How that incorporates into language. But I'm really curious, Richard, like, did reaching a wider audience change you as a thinker? Did it give you new words?
It gave me new words. I don't know. I feel mostly the same. It gave me more confidence because of the people who I reached and who really liked my work, like people that I really respected, like before I had started writing, like Steven Pinker and Tyler Cowen. And when those people were starting work, I had come out of nowhere and had no reason to expect any of those people would ever be reading what I wrote or be interested in what I wrote. And that like increased my confidence. It freed me to kind of just be myself. And if you, the early stuff is like, it's much more trying to come across as like normal. My voice is there, but I'm like, I don't want to say anything too out there. I mean, I came pretty early in saying civil rights law was a problem, but I was still writing in a way that like, didn't really have a lot of the flourishes I have now. And so that gave me kind of more confidence. But like I can't really say it like changed me in kind of profound way. I mean, my voice is kind of my voice. I don't think it's changed all that much over the years.
I'd love to hear from the audience in the chat if you want to share some thoughts on whether you think that it's the audience that creates the voice, or is it the voice that finds an audience? I find that an interesting question to debate. Armand, the floor is yours. I think everybody expected you to turn up wrapped in an American flag because that was your famous New York Times portrait. I really, really love it. I think just walking across San Francisco in that is a lot of fun. There are multiple interinteract marriages and babies, where people meet at interinteract events, fall in love, get married. And one of them was recently born, one of the babies. And I went to see him, and he's called Theodore after Roosevelt. And my little naive self walked into a baby clothes store in San Francisco and asked if they had anything with the American flag. And the way the three hippies looked at me in that store, I had just walked in to ask them if I could like club a bunch of baby seals. It was really embarrassing for them, but I got what I wanted eventually somewhere else. But you have to know your audience. Armand, how did you end up co-founding this important organization? I mean, and also you're coming from tech, so are you not supposed to be on the right? Just teasing you, but I want to hear what you say.
It's funny because like until a few years ago, coming from tech meant you were from the left, and now people assume you're from the right. Uh, so Unis for
I
Harris,
think that's many of us. Like you're staying where you are, and then the world just shifts, and you're like, okay, I guess I'm in a different political category now.
I would say for tech, it's more people around me have shifted somewhat, but it's more that like they're very prominent people who like didn't speak up as much. Like 4 years ago, Elon Musk was like not a major political figure, right? And so, but to answer your question earlier, like how, your story actually is really funny because when I did this, so there's Donald Trump came to town, right? And I was like, well, he's literally in my neighborhood. Like, I got to do something. And I tried to organize like various groups, and they're all busy, or like, I don't know, it was hard to get any institutional support. So I was like, fuck it, I'll do it myself. And I recruited a bunch of friends, tweeted about it. And I wanted it to have two specific focuses. One was patriotism, because as a child of refugees, like, I love this country. It's given me everything, its ideas and values. Like, even when I feel like we don't live up to them, it's a challenge to strive towards that. And I hate like that reaction you had, because the right has so like claimed this iconography that like when I went in San Francisco wearing this, people were like, "Are you like?" People thought I was with the protest, including those guys. Like, they're like, "Why are you on this side of the street? Like, come to us." And so then when I was like yelling against Trump and like getting rowdy, they got really angry at me, because the pro-Trumpers like looked at me and are like, "You're supposed to be with us, and you're wearing a giant like American flag outfit and flag and all this stuff." Um, but that's why I picked it. And the second thing is like, particularly at that time period, I was like really, I wanted to talk, I was concerned that abortion rights weren't being discussed, and like, um, that message I thought needed to be like pushed back into discourse. And I thought this was an opportunity to do that. Um, Partially because I really care about it, and partially because I wanted to win an election, and it was like our best issue. But like, um, the like yeah, so but in San Francisco, like, I had to reassure people like constantly that like I'm not with MAGA. And I know for a fact that in my neighborhood, if I put up American flag, people think I'm a Trumper. Like, so it's like a really difficult trap to get out of, where you need more people who are like very vocally left and vocally liberal to like embrace America and say that we love America, in order for us to not cede those symbols to folks who I think, frankly, like, I think Donald Trump's destroying a lot of what America makes America America. Um, yeah. As for the organization I created, you sound like you had another question.
Can I just stop for a second, because I think
Yeah.
before we go into the Yumi question, because language is not only verbal, right? When we
Mhm.
talk about language changing, that also exists on this level of symbols. And I think, for instance, the Trump movement or Trumpism is really well known for creating whole new symbols and kind of pretending that they have always been there. And maybe, you could analyze the Biden versus Trump battle as a very strong symbol side against something that is everybody is in a blue suit and everybody looks the same, well coiffed and polite. And in today's world, when language can be so confusing, it might be the world of the stronger symbol that just resonates better with people.
Think
Because
about the night before the election, right? The candidates picked their closing speeches. Kamala Harris looked gorgeous, had like an amazing suit, like beautifully staged presentation, talked about democracy in America. And Donald Trump what like drove a truck or something, right? Like, and like people made fun of him because he looked silly in the truck, and he was like making a big ruckus. But like that really, to me, is like, yeah, this is the final presentation that both these parties want to make to America about who they are. Um, and when Trump went to McDonald's earlier, a lot of like liberals were like making fun of it because it was fake, it was like a stunt. But like that, I knew that would kill it on social media, and it was like one of the most cited thing. People did surveys later, like, what do you remember from the election? Like, that was consistently something that people remembered as a strong visual, strong iconography. And so you're totally right. Politics is so much about visual identity. And I think the Democratic Party in particular, because we've been the party of like cultural elites and stuff like that, we're very good at putting together really polished, well-designed presentations. But for a lot of people, like, that strikes people as inauthentic. It doesn't actually appeal to them. Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt open at like the RNC is like, that is something that like people I hang out with would think is tacky. I maybe because I grew up poor, like I'm like, I know it's tacky, but I kind of like it. I was like, I love, the cheese of it. Um, I think Richard actually like, I strongly, it's kind of funny. I morally really don't resonate with the elite human capital and low human capital, because like I don't think I am better than somebody else. Like from moral valence, like I think all of us are God's children. But the delineation of sort of those classes of people really helped me understand of like what appeals to people come from different backgrounds of like amount of education and social position and things that like people I grew up with, and the people I sort of like I'm more around now, their tastes and their views of the world on sort of every level are very different.
And also just, I mean, some of the issues that you mentioned illustrate the complications between, like, here you are, two intelligent commentators on the internet, a lot of people follow you, a lot of people look up to you. And yet when you say Trump, I know for a fact that you kind of are on the same page about him. Or when we talk about abortion rights, I mean, one of Richard's most famous essays covers that and kind of celebrates women being pro-choice and explains to a right-wing audience why women are pro-choice. So it's kind of complicated, right? And I always wonder whether the fact that we don't really have a way to fully communicate with each other often across the polarized sides.
Yeah.
So you don't even know. I don't know. So there's this person who thinks you're a MAGA. There are people who think that Richard is a Trumpist because like, just read him or follow Armand on Twitter. It's complicated and we're people. And I like the fact that commentators today, and we'll talk about your rising power as commentators, take it very seriously to have nuanced opinions and to see life as a complex place where a lot of people have to coexist. I want to ensure that Richard gets to respond anything before we go into the YIMBY. Any thoughts on the visual symbolisms? And you as a blogger, do you analyze these? Do you feel like blogging is somehow a visual medium as well?
Well, it certainly is a visual medium. I mean, the picture choices are they're always fun. Yeah, it communicates something. But yeah, the American flag thing, I mean, it is kind of, what makes people right or left. It is, these symbols are not kind of secondary. They are kind of the main thing that motivates people. So the American flag thing, I mean, it is basically a way to signal, I think America is all right. I think our traditional system and our traditional hierarchies are something that are fine, or something that, we're fine for the time, and now we're okay as a country. And there is a kind of other side on the left which doesn't like the American flag. They might be happy with a lot of the progress America has made, but they're just kind of uncomfortable with the idea that you would be boisterously patriotic in that way. And the kind of the MAGA movement has become very pessimistic about American society, and still it has the flag. Sometimes you'll see Trump flags, or like this thin blue line flag, and so they're like almost getting away from the American flag because it's too optimistic. They just want Trump. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that you're going to lose the idea of the right being more associated with the American flag. The culture moves beyond them, and it becomes kind of a flag of restoration. It becomes a flag of kind of revanchism. It's strange, but I mean, if like liberals just want to drown conservatives in flags, if they can find it in themselves to do that, great. I mean, it would kind of diffuse a lot of that impact.
I'm doing my part.
You both are doing your parts. Do you guys see Trump as a linguist? There's this YouTube visual essays called Nerdwriter. I'm sure a lot of you here are familiar with his work. And one of the best videos he's ever created is how Donald Trump answers a question. I think this is from before his first being elected. And basically he tries to explain to us that Trump somehow revolutionized the English language, kind of creating his own version of it. Do you see that to be the case? And if so, did America catch up with him eventually?
Well, if you look at like the written text, like verbatim of the Trump quote, it looks like totally fucking insane because it's just gibberish, right? But then, and often when he speaks, he still kind of sounds incoherent, but like all of his like presentation is like it's oral. It's like in the tone, the facial expressions he makes, the pauses he makes, like and Richard's actually talked about like an oral culture versus a written culture, and like I think Trump is the ultimate embodiment of it, of like the way that he talks is very verbal and visual. And it totally doesn't work as text on a page. But like he's honestly like infected our brains with the way he talks. Like I say many such cases all the time, right? And I didn't even
That's
know
from him?
that's from him.
I
He
didn't
invented
even
that
know.
phrase.
Shoot, I have to say, I have to know what I'm using. I didn't know that. I just saw Cartoons Hate Her pick up on that and all the
That's
blogging.
how I realized this.
That's
This
from
is what I
him.
read. I was like,
Oh,
oh, I was like, holy shit, I say that all the time. I didn't know it was from
that's
Trump.
hilarious. But because his written communication is oral, right? And
Right.
I mean, people far more knowledgeable about online linguistics than myself will say that the great revolution that the internet gave us is that it kind of put back forth this oral tradition. Like everything we write, even blogging today, is a little bit like colloquialisms. It's like spoken English or spoken language. I would think that that only makes the people who can really write beautifully. It gives you all the bigger of a competitive advantage. But I think that's why he fares so well online, right?
Trump, it's kind of like an athlete who is really athletic as a young age, but then as he gets older, he kind of slows down and he has to use his body more effectively. Trump, if you watch him 10 years ago, there's a difference. But if you watch him 25 years ago, there's a huge difference. He used to be very, very sharp and very, very quick. And he's not anymore. Not that he was like, a genius or anything, or he was giving, policy insights, but he was very, very fast. Um, and he's kind of slowed down, but he has like this aura, this kind of confidence. And so that's why these things work. That's why tone, intonation, spacing, facial expressions, he's shameless. He's 100% confident in what he is doing. And that makes for an effective communication style. And he's not waiting for the audience or looking for the audience's approval. He is in like a very kind of literal sense, but he's also not too. I mean, you can tell that his kind of frame of reality is what he cares about. And this makes people like forgiving of like, the stuff back that he makes stuff up and the fact that he like, capitalizes words at random, which seems to make no sense, but it just makes sense to him because he's not going to follow the rules of standard English. He's just going to capitalize words because he thinks those words should be capitalized in that situation, and we just accept it. And so this is the charisma. This is the kind of the it factor that's made him just totally dominate one of our two political parties over the last decade.
I was wondering
Oh,
about
sorry.
he doesn't. Well, just on that specific point, like he doesn't actually physically write it. Like I've seen behind the scenes video and he'll like dictate it. But it's like they didn't show the process in which they decide which words to capitalize. Like does Trump say like, okay, I'll dictate this word you capitalize, this word you don't, because he doesn't physically write it. Like how does that shit work? It's just weird.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also,
I mean, it's a good question.
I mean, some of it must have come from him, right? And then the his aides, the way of a good LLM, they learn his style and are able to replicate. I mean, you just need a little bit of imagination. But I want to talk about, Richard, your blog posts a little bit because you seem to be very contrarian in the linguistic sense, in that you write very beautifully. I mean, you were on my podcast, The Hope Axis, recently. By the way, Cartoons Hate Her was also on my podcast a couple of months ago when she came in a mask. It was hilarious. Do watch it. And some of your sentences are so good that was the only podcast episode where I like read up parts, paragraphs, because they're just very poetic and very literary in a very like accessible way, but you're not doing this capitalization, screaming things, even in your tweets, right? So your tweets kind of follow the style, whether that's very satirical or you're being very heartfelt, asking for the death penalty and other things like that, which I'm not espousing here. But you're literary. So is this your decision to kind of distance yourself from the screaming MAGA people? Or is this just like you having been born with this voice and just keeping to it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been before the screaming MAGA people were much of taking over Twitter. I was writing like this. Yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of it just comes naturally. I don't know. I just kind of I think in stream of consciousness. I write in stream of consciousness, and it just kind of comes out, and then I edit and organize and so forth. But yeah, I don't know. I have nothing to say. I have no insights into what I'm doing. I'm
This
just
is up to be done by the PhD students of the future.
yes,
To cover this era. I always say that every era in history is pre something, right? You just don't know pre what you are. And this is all the more true for academic disciplines that are yet to be invented.
Richard, you went to high schools in the US, right?
Me?
Yeah, you went to like a US high school.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anna didn't, but like Anna, are you familiar with like AP US or AP Euro?
The
AP or advanced
style.
placement class.
They're
Oh,
basically
no.
like advanced placement classes. So in those classes, there's this thing called a DBQ, which is like a document-based question where like they give you historical documents and you're supposed to like interpret them and like answer questions about them.
I did
And
the GRE, which had a similar element.
so like imagine that for our era today, it's gonna be like Trump like the high school students of like 100 years from now.
I mean,
Like
yeah.
a Richard Hanania blog post.
But
Yeah.
my good friend Julia Zonevent, who is a professor at the New School, and she was actually my classmate in Budapest in a crazy sequence of events, and we ended up in the same city. And after the Zelensky, Trump, Vance trio disaster, she actually took the full-length video to her class, and they sat down and watched it with her undergrads. And I asked immediately, like, how did the kids respond to this? And she was like, most of these kids had never seen a 50-minute video in their lives.
Oh,
Sad. That is sad.
good.
I don't want to be like, the world is changing, that's fine. But it makes the viewership of The Brutalist all the more impressive, with like 3.5 hours or 4 hours. Anyway, so that's just something to bear in mind. And it makes it all the more, impressive to me when somebody in today's world is able to amass a following for in-depth content, whether that's regular tweeting or regular.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, what Armand said makes me sad. I mean, like, imagine we look to the founding fathers and they talk like cavemen. They talk like Trump. They're just grunting at each other. I mean, that would just be depressing. And like, people will look back at our era, and that's what they'll see. I mean, I hope that, like, this is like the smartphones. It's like cigarettes, right? As they say, you don't have it. You just cigarettes come out, you just smoke, you find out they're bad for you, adjust, and people smoke less and they realize what's happening. There's the smartphone issue is a big issue. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are legislating. Schools are adopting policies. But this is like a general problem. And I think that like politics kind of goes back and forth. And, I hope eventually the pendulum swings that like this is not just a permanent slide into idiocracy, that there is a kind of, at some point, people just get sick of it. But it'll have to start with like, and maybe this is the elite human capital framing. This is why it's important. Realizing what has gone wrong, like realizing just being disgusted with kind of what the intellectual environment is now. That's the first step to saying, okay, log off of Twitter. I mean, follow me, but log off of Twitter. Go read Substack. Go read serious newspapers. Go read books, and come back and have something interesting to say. I mean, that needs to be kind of the cultural change.
That's a bit like when I always call for more journalists to exist, because journalists write good novels because they are in the real world and not some kind of MFA ivory tower. This is the same. Like, if you want to have good tweets, ironically, you have to go off Twitter, live, have experiences, come up with insights, and then come back and tell us about it. If every tweet you tweet is just a response to another tweet, it becomes very iterative and very self-referential very quickly. And then we find ourselves in some kind of bubble of reality that is not real. We know a
You
famous
asked,
billionaire who is probably going through something like this these days.
you asked earlier about like a moment that made us become or whatever this, and I'm actually this is the silliest thing. I'm looking at it on my desk because this company, Sticker Mule, sent me my most famous tweet and in a framed picture. I was just like, they showed
What
up
is
at my
your most
home one
famous
day.
tweet? Can you hold it up?
So
We want to see
this
it.
is the
You
oh
would
God,
send
I
yeah,
think
my
I'm
famous
such a
tweets.
narcissist. But like they just sent it to me for free. I don't know if you can read it from here, but I can.
I'm 32 years old
I,
and still deeply terrified because anyone told me about 0 views. Why 0 views?
oh, it's because before views were counted.
Uh-huh.
But it
Okay.
had like half before this, I had like maybe 3,000 Twitter followers or something. It's very small. Like this is in 2021. And when you're talking about like life, you have to experience life. You can't just like be on Twitter and swim in Twitter and react to Twitter. This was literally like I woke up at night, I was thirsty. Like we were like with my girlfriend in Napa or Healdsburg or whatever. I was like, oh, I looked at the mini bar and I had this like deep feeling of fear from childhood. I was like, oh, it's just kind of funny. And I just like tweeted it. I went to bed and I woke up and it just exploded. Like hundreds of thousands of likes.
Many
Uh,
such cases.
many such cases. So it's like, yeah, like what makes for even if you're purely cynical and want to like produce good content, like the stuff that works for me is like living my life and experiencing the real world and yeah, finding inspiration in that.
Before we open the floor to questions, and guys, prepare your questions, raise your hands, share whatever you want in the Zoom. I want to talk a little bit about both Yimby and Richard, your book and your newsletter. And I know, Richard, when you were on my podcast, we talked a little bit about like the power of being frustrated with stuff. We like to kind of like chunk out all the negative emotion, the baby with the bathwater. Whereas we know that a lot of motivations in human life do come from just being irritated by something that you think you can improve, and then you go and do it. I think that there is a constructive embracing of negative emotions, some of them. So I just want to hear about the Yimby work that you're doing, Armand, and then talk a little bit about what makes Richard frustrated these days and what he does about it. This is
Well, so
against the Confederacy of the Dances part of the salon.
I've been involved in like E&B stuff for over 10 years. When I moved to San Francisco, I was working as an economic analyst, focused on low-income housing tax credit and renewable energy tax credit policy. I worked for this accounting firm who was like the biggest firm in that field, and so they needed somebody who studied policy for it. That got me interested, and there's like a local talk where Sonia Traus, who's like really the godmother of the E&B movement,
Yeah,
she's
she's awesome.
sorry.
Just love her. She's great.
Oh, she'd been a math teacher in Oakland, and she like showed up to planning commission hearings and was like the only person who showed up in favor of housing, because nobody otherwise did this at the time. And she's just like a very special personality. Within a week of meeting her, I was like, my roommate was like, "Who's this strange woman you're like following to like the Sunshine Task Force, the like Historic Review Commission, like things I didn't even know existed." And it was just like a band of misfits. Like it was called SF BARF at the time, Bay Area Renters Federation. Like it really, none of this would have taken off if like Sonia was not such a character. She's such a honestly, I think you'd love her. You should meet her.
I've met her. She's awesome.
Oh yeah,
I saw her campaign with her pregnant belly and unstoppable and inimitable. It also shows how like one person can spread the gospel in this sense.
Yeah.
It's like if you are really badass and if you really believe in what you're doing, other intelligent people will be like, well, she's kind of right about this stuff. Let me also get involved. This is how politics should work, right?
Well, that's how it did. Like it's like for years, like I got working in politics. I worked on Senator Wiener's campaign before he was a state senator, who's like a big YIMBY voice. Mayor Breed was a big pro-housing mayor, a bunch of campaigns. And although I now work in the private sector, I've still been involved as like an activist and as you know on Twitter and stuff like that. But this summer I created this thing. I co-founded this thing called YIMBYs by Harris, and it was again one of those things where it's like somebody tweeted an idea. They're like, oh, like, you know, Tim Walz, who's the VP at Signed Good Pro Housing Bills in Minnesota. We should have a Yimbies for Harris because there's all these white dudes for Harris and so on. And I was like, sure, if you're interested, DM me. And my DM's like, everybody slid into my DMs. I was like, oh, I need to organize this. So I created a WhatsApp. And that exploded. It was like, okay. And within like, we had to pull together this giant online event in 3 weeks. We ended up having like 70 speakers. It was like a crazy variety show. US senators, everything. We raised like $150,000 for the campaign. And obviously, even though we didn't win, I think it helped. We generated a lot of news stories and discussion and got a lot of electeds who never talked about these issues, especially on a national stage, to be able coming out and saying, like, I'm a YIMBY across the spectrum of the Democratic Party, which is really cool. We had like very centrist voices like Governor Jared Polis, but then also like fairly left voices like Senator Warren, Congressman Barbara Lee. And now recently we've relaunched as YIMBY Democrats for America, with the idea being that like we want to continue this and we want to make the cause of being pro-housing something that is within the core of the Democratic Party. There are YIMBY Republicans, and I'm happy to like work with them. I don't think our mission's in contrast, but I think our mission's specific in the sense that like we really want most urban areas are controlled by Democrats. Most blue states with those urban areas are controlled by Democrats, where the highest demand for housing is controlled by Democrats. And frankly, states like Texas, where Republicans are running, the rules are much like in a lot of ways they're ahead because the regulatory environment is less anti-housing. So we have a lot more work to do in our jurisdictions to try to peel that back. And I would say our newest sort of final evolution is what we're trying to do is our podcast is going to be about abundance broadly, because in my personal experience, like the issues I saw with housing where there's like rules and procedures that people use to obstruct it, or like one cranky person, like in San Francisco, I don't know if it's still the case or changed, but for a long time, you could have a delay of any bike lane because one person put down like $100 and had a petition, and that triggered a hearing a month later where a bunch of city staff had to spend like hours and hours for a presentation, and there was a hearing and they could deny it. And there was an effort legislatively, I remember a few years back, where somebody was like, well, how about we make it so you have to like get 20 people to sign this petition before we do it? And there's a huge outcry. They're like, you're shutting down citizenship participation. This is anti-democracy. That dynamic exists in clean energy. That dynamic exists in transportation. That dynamic exists across like a broad area of American life. And part of the idea of like abundance, which by the way, I hope Richard reviews because I think his center-right perspective on it would be interesting. That's sort of where we're going now. Like we want to build the YIMBY philosophy into looking at other good things that we need that we're like holding ourselves back from accomplishing.
I was at the Abundance book launch party in Manhattan with Ezra Klein and Derek Simpson, and yeah, I kept wondering, like, is YIMBYism left or right today, or is it kind of coming into some beautiful dialectic with the abundance movement? How do you guys, Richard? Is it left or right?
Well, I mean, that's a very complicated question. It's a left-wing movement now because left-wing people are discussing it. They're talking about it in the context of left-wing intellectual and political history. The right was kind of always YIMBY by default, and always kind of abundance by default. They're getting away from that, though. I think that conservatism had these ideas, and they were kind of grandfathered into the movement. They're not where the base is. They're not where the leadership of the Republican Party is now. This is just Trump and Vance and Elon, basically. They're, the Trump in particular, the interest is immigration, and the interest is being anti-trade. It's kind of anti-abundance in that way. And so, yeah, I mean, the trajectory on the left, it's interesting. I mean, so the trajectory on the left is good. The trajectory on the right is bad. What that mean? Does that mean in like 10 years, like conservative states are going to be more difficult to build than liberal states? I would bet probably no. I don't know. This kind of inertia is pretty strong, but hopefully, yeah, but hopefully liberal states could be better. I think there's a good chance of that. And Yeah, I mean, I think that the abundance agenda is interesting because it's just a very much simpler story, which is you could just say liberals are wrong about markets. And that's like what's going on here. And I talked to Derek about this, and he says, well, I believe in climate change is important and I care about inequality and this and that. And it's like, fine. But yeah, but the general lesson is, I guess the general maybe that he's just pro, he's got these cultural things too, like abortion and so forth. But whatever, I'm glad that people are influencing who they can influence. I mean, the parts of the country are, as Armin says, the most economically productive parts of the country are liberal. They are democratic. They're going to need liberals talking to them and encouraging them to do things. And I'm glad to see it. I think this could be a movement that it has something to give all sides.
I want to hear from you,
I would
Richard.
say,
Oh yes,
one
sir,
thing
go.
know that is like one of the ways that there's like a right abundance faction and a left abundance faction. Part of the distinction is that it's not just like for us on the left for markets. It's like in the 1970s, there's really the rise of like the new left, particularly Ralph Nader, which is oriented around restraining the power of government. There's a quote Derek Thompson talked about recently where Ralph Nader, when he was asked when he was running for president, like, what are you most proud of? Why are you qualified? And he's like, nobody has sued more government agencies than me, right? Which is very different from like a New Deal liberalism perspective of like, what can the government do? For many years, there's been that, how can we restrain government by lawsuits, by regulation? And so like things like high-speed rail, like Richard was talking about markets, but like that is not a failure because like we need to a deregulation of the market. It's because we've highly regulated the state itself. Like the government is blocking its own way to accomplishing its goals. So there are things like where I think like on housing where abundance means like more market, like allowing the market to function more in part. But then there's stuff like the government can't do anything without having a zillion comment periods and regulations and notices and lawsuits, which is very much about like preventing the government from hubbling itself.
I mean, that's part of it. It's part of it. The government is not being allowed to do things if you have something like high-speed rail. But on housing, the problem is that government and building in general is doing too much. And even if the mechanism for enforcement is lawsuits, it's still there are some things that Democrats and liberals want government to do that conservatives simply don't want them to do. I mean, a lot of it are kind of DEI regulations, their environmental regulations, their workplace safety, their labor unions. So it's not just simply that liberals have hampered the state. Liberals have empowered the state too, and that's kind of a lot of what went wrong here, and a lot of the reason the conservative states have many fewer of these problems.
Well, I think conservative states, liberals have in many ways empowered the government to control more areas of like human life, but they've really restrained it from building. Like just physical environmental changes have been really, I think, restrained, where the government's restraining itself.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's just a matter of framing.
Yeah.
I want to give Richard a chance to talk about how he deals with his frustrations with the idiocracy, because I know he has some takes on this. And then we go to the questions. And you're famous. You're famously dealing with them out in the open. So this part of the salon is for those who have never come across a tweet by you ever in this life.
You know, I've been trying not to just be controlled by the For You algorithm. I've muted a lot of like the worst people I find out there, like a lot of the people they call the dissident right people, the people who say, women shouldn't wear pants and this other weird things. Like I've muted like a lot of those people, those pseudo intellectuals. They have their 10,000 word essays about women wearing pants, like emasculating men. They're just these stupid things that like they're writing about. Um, and so, yeah, but like, because a lot of that stuff could be a distraction. You could just be like, this is the most annoying person. I'm more interested in the ones when they get closer to policy. I'm more interested in when you get closer to policy, actually, it's weirder. I mean, it's the people who are like most in Elon Musk's ear are the people who are just completely making stuff up, or just like the complete fake news accounts. So yeah, I'm trying to like give people a framework to understand this is what's going on here, like the importance of like the cat turd like figures, which is kind of hard for people to get their head around, but I do think that's what's going on. I don't think Elon Musk is the mastermind behind conservatism. I do think it's cat turd, and his ilk. And there is a kind of just a rotten culture culture here, and trying for people to understand it. And even like a lot of the right wing people, like I had an article about Michael Schellenberger a while back. He's not a fake news peddler. He's not completely someone who just has nothing to say or anything, but like has just kind of an oppositional style where everything is about deflecting from the problems of Trump or the problems of MAGA or the problems of conservatism, which I find annoying. Is kind of a very unhealthy way to approach public policy issues. So it's like there's this ideas debate, like, oh, abundance versus not abundance, which is fine. We have these kind of like arguments, but there's also like a question of whether we can even have rational debate or like have like an ability to reason through problems. And we're kind of a lot of the online discourses we're not there. Like it's this kind of this meta question of like what we're doing here is actually quite important at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of in some ways, it almost feels quaint to have like these, like a book came out and people are arguing about it
Yeah.
because this tiny little corner of the internet that people are doing it. And even that is like, there's so much of like the critics of abundance, like are just making shit up. Like there's someone who at a certain point was like, this book cover is similar to this book cover written by a guy who like supports fossil fuels. So, and then the cowardly thing of like, I was just pointing out the similarity. Ugh. Like it's just even within the
Yeah.
corner of like intellectual debate, there's still a lot of people who just love like they want to dunk, right? They just like, what's the quick hit for a dunk? Um,
Right. And this is, and we're not helpless. I mean, Ezra and Derek are powerful figures. I mean, they are kind of allies in this battle. And yeah, I mean, there has to be a cultural change where the people who lie, the people who make stuff up, the people who are zero sum in their thinking and misanthropic. I mean, I think this applies across the political spectrum. That kind of stuff needs to be stigmatized and defeated. And so, yeah, I mean, it's kind of you're battling against a lot. You're pushing against kind of the trajectory of just the internet, the kind of pessimism and sort of what Twitter encourages. But at the same time, like, people want to feel like they're intelligent and engaging with the issues. There you have to kind of appeal to the better aspects of their nature. And maybe sometimes I appeal to the worst aspects of their nature by saying, like, look at these people, they're so stupid. Like, let's like laugh at them. But that's like kind of weaponizing maybe a bad, a kind of usually negative trait in a positive pro-social direction. So, we're all trying, I think, in our own way to fix this problem.
And this is where long form and short form greatly differ in what kind of permissions they give, right? How many people will tell you that, oh, I did this or that because this book changed me or changed my life? I read a program essay and I started a startup. I read Atomic Habits and I read a book on physics and I went into physics. What tweets and short form communication give us basically is permission to say stuff. Donald Trump himself opened this floodgate, not just like, flooding us with a lot of new expressions, but tweets have never been the same. And then we're not even talking about your favorite person, Richard, Elon Musk, and what kind of permissions he is giving by just showing a great example to the public on what is okay to say in public and what isn't, and in what style, and with what veracity.
Yeah, I mean, he really is a kind of sinister figure. I mean, because Trump, nobody expects him to tell the truth. Everyone knows he's kind of a joke. Elon Musk has objectively great accomplishments, and he has people who look up to him for those accomplishments for, very good reason. And he's lies more than Trump. He lies more than any human. I would argue he's had told more lies that have reached more people than any human being in history. It's probably not even close. And what does that tell people? Like, it tells people like, oh, here's a role model, somebody who accomplished a lot and is actually smart, and he just lies and he gets his way and he gets away with it. I think it's just very kind of important that Elon Musk not succeed politically. Like, I just think that is a kind of a disaster, because we don't want people like that.
With big rockets come big responsibility. Armand, any notes on Elon before we throw the mic into the audience?
I mean, I really don't like the guy, obviously.
Sorry, Elon, we're doing this on your platform. Apologies.
Yeah, like what I would say, like, particularly frustrates me is that there are these little moments where there'll be a tell where he'll like say something that's untrue, and then somebody will respond, and then he'll like make the smarter argument. And even if I still disagree with that, and that shows, like, I think, like, sort of dishonesty, where it's almost like, I don't know why people are fans of him when he is revealing less blatantly than Trump, but like both of them do this thing where like they very obviously have contempt, the most contempt for the people who look up to them, right? Like Elon Musk has less contempt for me who dislikes him than for the people that he's lying to over and over and over again, because he knows a lot of the things he's saying are not true, and he's feeding it to the people that like really trust him. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I get on some deep personal level, like it feels corrosive to me sometimes to be on, even on Twitter, because I'm just like, the joy has gone out of a lot of it. Of like, I don't have viral tweets anymore for fun life things. It's just like Elon Musk said this thing, and I'll just very politely be like, here's why it's a lie, and that'll go viral. But it's like just lies after lies after lie. And the vice president did it. Like, just basic things. Like he said today that this guy who's MS-13 was convicted. And if you read the filing, he was like never charged, or I don't know if he was charged for, but he's never convicted of a crime, but he just said convicted. And he also said under the Biden administration in 2019. It's just like, it's this flood of just.
Yeah, he corrected the, I think he said he corrected
it later, yeah.
Yeah.
This
So
is
like
not the other thing, not the
convicted part. It's like, I grew up in the Bush era, and there's a lot of like, politics is often a thing of like there's a lot of dishonesty and misleading, but like with Bush, at least, like, they went through a lot of effort to try to like cobble up bullshit evidence for weapons of mass destruction. Today, Trump would just be like, Greenland, they've got nukes, they're gonna nuke us, so we need to go to war. And then 40% of the country that suddenly have strong opinions on the danger of Greenland's nukes.
Would you have imagined us millennials in our youth saying something like Bush at least ... That was unimaginable. I hope we won't period in 25 years when we will say Trump at least. Every era is pre something. We never know pre what. But this is where I used to be very skeptical about the whole false, like the fake news narrative. And now I actually see it as almost a new epistemological era, right? Because you had periods where people were just like, this berry is poisonous. And that what you said was like the signified and the signifier were just so close. Then you had veracity eras, you had propagandistic eras, like Soviet Union press probably was not super reliable. And then now you have this whole new category of meaninglessness that, I don't want to be trite here, but it's just really, really fascinating. It's a completely new relationship between an authority figure, or at least somebody worth listening to in your mind, because you are listening, and the words. If that's not interesting linguistically about our era, I don't know what is. And it's kind of sad that this kind of came out of this great freedom that we were given, which is just to be able to say whatever we want online. Audience, jump in. DJ, David, just so you know, those of you who don't have the video on are not visible on the live stream. So if you want to remain unseen on Twitter, that's your choice. We will still hear your question. DJ, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so thanks to both of you guys. This is really great. I'm not really sure how to phrase this exactly as a question, but let me just kind of just sort of lay out a couple things that are on my mind, and maybe you guys can react to them. So I heard an interview with Noah Smith, I think it was yesterday, a podcast he did, where he sort of commented that there's this sort of narrative that the right likes to talk about, how the West is falling and we need to defend the West. And then there's a smaller but still very loud sort of leftist version of that. The West was always crap. They were always colonialists, burn it all down. And they're both just really foolish ideas, but they're also kind of viral ideas, and you can make money on Twitter, promoting those ideas. And Noah Smith made the point that, it used to be when we thought about nationalism, it was a border kind of thing. Like Hungary had grievances with your neighbors, or, you were tired of being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it was very up close, right? And it was often ethnic. There was sort of ethnic differences, especially in the Balkans and just everywhere, pretty much every
It was like you were minding your own business and somebody came and imposed some tax on you, or you were drafted into some war and you were like, no, thanks.
Yeah. And so it was a combination of sort of real grievances, but also ethnic grievances, right? I mean, Kosovo, most civil wars are ethnic civil wars. That's like the default throughout history. And he was sort of saying that, well, now globally, we can just do this all day, every day. We can have a civil war every day. We can be the white nationalists, either the ones who outright love Putin, or at least, are anti-Putin because he's protecting Christianity or Western values or whatever it is you want to call it. And you can have the radical sort of free Palestine types who have kind of their narrative they want to get out, and they can just all day, every day do this forever, right? It's never going to stop. There's always going to be some new one who enters the discourse with a new message that goes viral. And what you said, Richard, about Elon, I mean, it's so true. He doesn't care about truth or really reality. I can't tell how much of it is just like he's drug-addled versus there's some weird kind of Machiavellian political strategy there. So what is the chance that it just never gets better, right? I mean, we're all complaining about Twitter, but we're also still on it, right? And some of us are quite prominent on it. And what if this just continues forever? And really the only person who's going to beat the next Trump is going to be the person who can out-Trump him, who can lie even more brazenly, either on the left or the right. And, what does that portend for us?
Any predictions?
I think Trump is a uniquely bad figure. I mean, there's other politicians who've tried to replicate Trump, to try to be something like Trump at the state level. Trumpism without Trump, it usually fails. They do worse than the typical politician. They don't do better than the typical politician from their party. I think that his kind of combination of just shamelessness, charisma, celebrity, connection with the base, that's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. I mean, Musk is much less popular than Trump. Not Musk can't run for president, but if he could, he wouldn't have the connection with the Republican base that Trump has. And so that's one reason for optimism. There is just this man who is a uniquely evil figure and is just kind of uniquely evil and powerful. And he's dominated for 10 years, but he has he has some kind of maximum date, 2028, he has to leave us alone. I mean, unless something strange happens. So there's that. But there is, the underlying kind of stupidity and crudification of the culture and the educational and kind of ethical polarization between the right and the left, that is still there. And so, yeah, things might snap back to a place that's not very good, but at least Trump won't be a part of it.
Armand, do you have any notes on that?
Oh, that was a question just for Richard. The, I mean, what I would say is like in my lifetime, there have only really been two political figures that had such a strong, distinct imprint on society. There was Trump, and before that was Obama. And I think if you see it now, like it's weird. Gen Z is both the most like worst right wing it's been in my lifetime, like the youngest generation. But they also still really love Obama. Like I think that is on Twitter, you'll think Obama's really unpopular for some reason, but like he's actually very popular in real life. And I actually came up under Obama, and that whole framework of like we need to think about policy technocratically and like look at like cost benefit and like try to like that entire Obama style of politics was like how I thought the world operated, because that's like when I came of age. And then the Trump thing was so jarring because I was like, this isn't how politics works. And now that's been the dominant style. So, I think when he either leaves or finally dies, I think there will be somebody else. Something I really underrated in my youth was just like the importance of unique individuals to really shape reality. Like the great man stuff I used to think was bullshit, but I think about like if it was just some other Republican and not Trump, if he'd not run, like I don't think a McCain administration
You
would
seem
like.
to be aligned on that there is like a diabolical figure who kind of unlocks things that other people wouldn't be.
I think Obama was not diabolical, but yeah, I think there are pivotal people in certain moments, and especially given our like media age, where they can directly commune with people, right? Like back in the day, you might have had an imagined social connection with the king, but you didn't know what he sounded like. So it'll be interesting to see like who the next personality will be.
I might see this a little bit differently because from my angle, it's a little bit like, yes, you get the great or ungreat man, woman, and they create for themselves, a very unique kind of one-off system that we feel nobody else could have pulled off, whether positively or negatively. And then after they're gone, either you have a kind of interregnum or even civil war or equivalent of just chaos, because nobody can live up to that. But sometimes what happens is like Octavian, like somebody builds out the dictatorial system, and somebody even more ruthless and clever and maybe calmer, more stable, higher born, higher supported, comes and uses it. So there is a danger to, this is the same for Orban, right? You tweak the constitution out of shape, which is possible in many European parliamentary democracies, because you don't have the kind of sanctity of the constitution as you would in the US, and then it will be changed. Like, in tech, we constantly ask ourselves, like, are you building a tool that if an evil person would seize, they would, create enormous harm with it? And I feel like a lot of the systems in liberal democracies are built so that this can't happen. An incompetent good guy and a super competent evil person will have to work within the same limitations, and removing some of those limitations, brings in a lot of, imagine if the things that FDR created for himself, not just the political longevity, but a lot of his powers, had stayed for everybody. Like, imagine what would have happened if like Nixon had the same kind of leverage. And I think that those are just important things to never forget.
Well, Trump is trying, I know that several of the actions he's taken on immigration have specifically cited the powers that FDR used for internment, like the foreign policy justifications and stuff like that. And so when you talked about this figure who would be more competent or more ruthless, like Octavian. I was like, well, very clearly JD is trying to be that person.
We have a hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Thanks for turning on your video.
Hi.
Yeah, great to meet you.
So I had a question, mostly for Richard. I'm just not familiar with Armin's work. I don't know if it's similar, but I was wondering, like, Richard, do you ever think about the messenger, kind of related to what we were talking about? This could be for you personally, but then also, for wider elections. Like, I feel like the left needs like an Andrew Tate-like figure, not there's a bunch of problems with that, obviously, but
You mean a big populist with a big audience
a
and
big
simple message.
populist, masculine, related to like ideas of myth. It almost seems like Trump understands this on like not exactly an intellectual level, maybe, but like the story you're telling people is more important than the actual politics, and that seems to be the only way I can make some sense of what he's doing. But yeah, on the left, especially some of the people I like the most, it's like I get that why they don't have mass appeal. We need more of a figure that has wide appeal, I guess, and you kind of have to be a cool guy that little boys look up to, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, a few things happened to liberals in the last decade or so. They became kind of the party that was more feminized, more neurotic. You look at kind of just neuroticism of young people, young women in particular, who are left wing. It's kind of off the charts. And the people of like, going to the principal's office, just the kind of the people who are believers in expertise and institutions, which are that's often the smart way to be. It's better than being like, like you see the people who go on Joe Rogan. I mean, it's often better just to trust experts, but it's not cool. It's never cool to trust like the head of the, HHS. Well, maybe now the head of HHS is a celebrity, but you know what I'm saying. The normal person who like would rise to a high level in that position. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the Democrats have, they do have this striking lack of charisma. And it's partly self-inflicted, like the Rogan thing. I mean, they are the ones who kind of turned on Rogan. Rogan liked Bernie Sanders in 2016. And then, they would try to cancel Joe Rogan and wouldn't let anyone go on there because of his views on trans issues. So they did have like this kind of cultural appeal to these masculine young men, and it just didn't. I mean, they just kind of pushed them away, so in some ways consciously, in some ways kind of implicitly in what they were doing. So there needs to be I think that there needs to be a kind of understanding that like feminization and pessimism and neuroticism are like there as a package. It's reflected in a lot of kind of democratic policies. I think the anti-abundance kind of tinge of democratic policy making often comes down to the idea, well, what if someone gets hurt? What if something goes wrong? We can't build anything. That's, it's always this idea, this everything bagel liberalism, this idea that something might go wrong or somebody might feel excluded, therefore we're kind of frozen and can't do anything. And yeah, I mean, Ezra Klein once said, I try to imagine what a liberal Joe Rogan would look like, and I have a hard time doing it. It's kind of like our liberal Jordan Peterson, he said. And it's kind of like, it has to be organic, because when when conservatives sometimes go out and try to create like a liberal media or like a liberal or a conservative, their own version of conservative media or conservative academia, it doesn't work, because like the New York Times didn't start out and said, we're going to be a liberal paper. The New York Times started out saying, we're going to be journalists, we're going to do news. And Joe Rogan and a lot of these guys, like the UFC didn't start out and say, we're going to do this conservative thing. Andrew Tate didn't start out and saying, I'm going to be this right-wing cultural figure. Joe Rogan certainly didn't start that way. There was just kind of this cultural reality, and it kind of meshed with one side of the political spectrum. So Democrats, the thing is like, not that they need to create these things, it's that they need to change themselves to be open for when the next cultural figure comes along, the next podcast host or the talk show host or the professional league, sports league or whatever. They're kind of culturally aligned. So yeah, I think you're thinking about this in the right way, but these things can't be that kind of conscious and pre-thought out. You've got to change, and then the opportunities are going to come.
You think at a smaller, like I get at a big level, you would need to really just change the party that kind of has to be organic, but on a smaller level, like have you ever just thought of the idea of like, man, this article that I'm writing, if I had like a black woman on my staff, this might be received a lot better. That and like that's something you could, theoretically do. You
I mean,
think
there's
there's
the
room for that?
Gamergate
What's
podcast.
what? I'm sorry. What would that do if I had a black woman on my staff? That would
Kind of playing identity politics, but it's like something I would imagine you feel the same way. It's like you don't want to do that, but it's like you got to play the game to be effective politically, to get your ideas across. Sometimes you're not the best messenger. You have to give it to somebody else for them to put it out. I wish you didn't have to, but it seems like you have
I mean,
to.
Richard is Palestinian, and you are known for your pro-Israel views, so I don't think that is anything being held back here that is not being said.
No, I think that's an example where it works in his favor because he's Palestinian. People might listen a little bit more.
are you saying like the Democrats need to have like masculine looking white men like represent them? Is that what kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they should consider these things. Like there are these kind of when you run somebody, like it is just the fact that like a fat guy with a buzz cut like John Tester just kind of seems to do well politically better than the typical Democrat. So that kind of messaging I think is real, but it's just like being too educated and kind of too I don't know. It's very weird. You look at the state level and you look at like the politicians who succeed. They're often, quite boring. I think that the national political seat is just so different. It's like so different from everything else. Like who's running for president? When we think about the Trump Kamala race, it's not necessarily what's going to succeed there. It's not necessarily going to be the same thing. What's going to succeed to make like your typical senator be, one of the most popular people in the body. So it's kind of yeah, maybe you don't need that stuff. I mean, I don't know. Like at the local level, I think it's just presidential politics. There needs to be I think the presidential thing is just unique. You need a politics of celebrity, in some sense at that level. Obama was a celebrity, right? Trump is a celebrity. And then all the elections involving Trump are just about being whether you're for or against Trump. So like at that level, like yes, it could just come down to like nominate someone who's smart and good looking and kind of dynamic, and these things will tend to work out.
I have one story I think really well before that. I was like, first of all, I'm working out. Okay, I will. Democrats need a masculine figure. I've been hitting the gym more, so fill this out better soon, and maybe I can be the masculine.
You'll bulk up,
Democrat.
and then you will be the Schwarzenegger of the American Democratic Party.
I got something, but
You're getting there. Just talk
I'll
to
get
Brian
there.
Johnson a little bit about like what green juices to drink in the morning.
That's right. So when I was doing this protest against Trump in my neighborhood, I wore like American flag overalls and had and I brought like a bunch of, I wore like waved American flag and had like these American flag wrist things and glasses. And I encouraged the other people with me to try to do that. And they were like, this is something that's just like very Democrat, is like this sort of like gauche tackiness, like we're really afraid of. Like we're comfortable with it. It's like not in our personality. We're more, Richard was talking about like feminization, but I would say like if you look at, and neuroticism is not like, I'm not using it pejoratively, just like when you look at personality tests, the big 5 IQ, like people who are Democrats are more likely to have higher traits of neuroticism. It's just a feature of personality across the board, like men, women, everything in our party, like we are more concerned with matters of taste. I see this contrast a lot with my parents who are Republicans, very conservative. I grew up with them, but then my partner is like liberal and like she went to Stanford and like there are things my parents think are like fancy rich people things that she's always very nice. She loves them, but like he's like it feels a little like, not right or gauche and like but like most Americans are not like fancy, sophisticated cultural elites. I think that's part of like I hate Andrew Tate because he's a fucking criminal who like abuses women. But the reason a lot of like liberals never even like would get into him is because he's like so over the top and so tacky. Like even if he wasn't an awful person, just like as a matter of taste that doesn't appeal to our sensibilities. And I think like we need to get over our hangups of like where everything has to be so polished and nice and like be cheesy, be corny, be tacky, like that mass media stuff that like we kind of put our noses up above is what the majority likes.
As
Like,
Obama was, right? Like Obama was, and Clinton positioned themselves as kind of men of the people. As it was mentioned that the phrase liberal Jordan Peterson. My first thought was that's not possible. That's like an oxymoron. And then you realize that no, actually, I just watched a couple of days ago A Complete Unknown about Bob Dylan, and like Bob Dylan was a kind of liberal Jordan Peterson, right? I mean, at a much much higher Nobel Prize winning level, where you have like this skinny sad guy talking about things that resonate with everybody. I have this theory that it's a little bit a derivative from George Lakoff's strict father theory that America has like an obsession with preachers, years of preachers. It's preacher culture. And that can come from everywhere. Like Jordan Peterson is archetypically a preacher, right? Like a gaunt, kind of wrinkly man with the weight on his shoulder who will tell you the hard truths and everybody will listen, and it's very either or, very binary, and you will somehow get your shit together. But I don't know, Chris Rock is also a preacher character who can deliver these big news. Maybe Richard here is a preacher character. And so it is quite, political side agnostic. You just really need charismatic people who can deliver. Bill Burr says, DJ in the chat, absolutely. And you see that across the board, everywhere where public speaking is involved, in church, stand-up comedy, academia, politicians. We just have to cultivate these people. Maybe like it can be female as well. I think AOC is a kind of preacher in the making, if she plays it right. And that just speaks to the simplicity of the language, right? I mean, the whole idea of the preacher is somebody who will be able to translate very complicated and sometimes very ambivalent scriptures in a way that relates to your real life, and will explain to you that this passage is really about you taking care of your grandmother or cleaning your room or yes we can. And I'm kind of comforted by that idea, because it means that we are very receptive to good preaching in some sense as the human audience. We just need good figures. I don't think there is one right now, by the way. I think there is a shortage of preachers. This is me calling out to the audience to come forward if you have a preaching ambition. Lev, you had your hand up. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, my point is kind of like, receded into the mist of time. Although, I do just want to say it's so funny that you brought up like A Complete Unknown, because the whole time I had it coming on like, oh my God, yes, we need Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie to come back, and like that's what's missing. And like there's an entire sensibility there that is like, I guess I'm very disturbed by the idea that that the left is sort of trapped in this sort of extreme sophistication and polish, and like very, subtle, nuanced thinkers, and that's what the problem is, because I actually don't think so. I think like I won't say there's as much, because, the apples and oranges and, whataboutism, but, I do think that there's a lot of really reflexive, reactive, kind of mindless, probably unhelpful tendencies in terms of, just the left discourse, as well as the right. I mean, there's a lot of freaking mindless discourse, on the left. I mean, I am a Tumblr denizen, and like, there's a reason why Tumblr got the reputation that it got, and like, none of that stuff went away. And I mean, right now, it's funny because, like, I mean, I joined the seminar partly because these guys are like two of the people that tweet the most good sense, of all the people that are left on Twitter. And it's funny because, like, there's like a sort of hate cruise out for people like this. I mean, I think particularly Richard. And, there are people that are just like, oh my God, like if you have Richard on your podcast, something is wrong with you. And it's like, we can't be like that, guys. Like, we can't be thinking like that. We can't have this kind of reflexive, purity based kind of purge minded, cooties minded kind of playground bullshit because, that's not an adult conversation. I don't, well, we're just, we can't be like this. And I think, the sort of mindlessness of that, sort of tendency in the discourse is almost as disturbing to me, maybe in some respects more disturbing than the mindlessness that I see on the right, which at least I sort of like, well, if at some level, if I expect to see this at all, I expect to see this on the right. But it's like outraging me when it's on the left. And it's, it's the thing for me on the left, it's the thing that's in the way of the left kind of pulling itself together and becoming functional. So I just want to sort of caution, I know I'm sort of babbling a little bit, but I want to caution us against, aligning think with left and anti-think with right, because this whole think versus anti-think axis is for me very fundamental right now, and it's not specifically aligned with the left and the left and the right respectively. It's more complicated than that, and we lose track of that at our peril. And the difficulty for me is, I guess, like this reflexive rejection of thinking, or this reflexive rejection of sophistication. How do we get a figure like Bill Clinton was very fucking smart, excuse my language. And, Obama, very smart, very thinky. And somehow, those figures managed to be successful. And, am I completely aligned with them in various respects? Not 100%, but boy, I would like an era where they came back. Compared to what it is that we have now. And I'm just trying to figure out what has gone wrong with the left and where the left is just as sort of infested with this kind of like very reflexive, very not thoughtful patterns of reactionary, I won't say thinking, I'll say discourse. And, this is terrible because I'm just sort of like, I'm on the left and I'm left bashing. And like, we all know how this goes. And I'm being such an asshole kind of like classic centrist right now. But I just don't know what else to say because that's where the problem is in my eyes.
I would say that, like, I mean, I know I will get shit for being on this platform with Richard. And there's a lot of things Richard says that I find, I mean, to be frank, like morally repulsive. But I think the game that we played where it's like, don't platform them, or whatever, like, doesn't work in a world in which like the right dominates all cultural communication. And so this idea of like, I mean, there's like Tumblr, you're right, is like the ultimate worst of this. It's like there were periods of time and where I took seriously, people would DM me and be like, hey, I saw that like you follow this person, but they said these other things that are problematic, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll stop that. And it's like, following someone doesn't even mean I agree with them. Like, I follow Donald Trump because I want to find, I want to be first to know if like tomorrow we're nuking Greenland and I have to figure my life out. Like, and any vague association, like, frankly, like, my parents aren't the famous figures, but they're my parents and I love them, and their opinions are probably to the right of Richard's on like many things because they're just pretty standard Republicans now, and like Trump more than he does, for example. So I think like we're getting over it. There's still the last thrashes of that discourse, but I think people are understanding like that it's just not sustainable to try to like that. There's a period of time people feel like, don't give Joe Rogan a platform. It's like, don't give the biggest podcaster in the world a platform. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we're beyond it. And then, the people who are the people who still are into the cancellations are also the people who have a lot of awful views on many other things. So it's like, it all kind of goes together, kind of the bad policy, the fuzzy thinking, the defective thinking about public policy, and this inability to engage outside your circle. I mean, these are all kind of the same people in the same institutions. So that makes it kind of easier because because you could, you understand that like this is kind of what you're having to fight against. It's a kind of just a bad way of looking at the world.
We had some comments about Josh Shapiro in the Zoom chat. If David wants to jump in and explain himself.
Yeah, so I'm kind of biased because he's my governor, but if anybody could assume the
You
man,
just love his linguistics.
yeah, I mean he seems to have copied a lot of Obama's speech tendencies, and it's I thought he did an incredible job on was it the politically incorrect with Bill Maher a few weeks ago. Certainly dodges questions very well and dodges anything related to the kind of that weird 2020 to 2024 period. But I think he has some potential. I think it could be one to watch.
There's a great Daily Show bit where they have put up a picture of Barack Obama and they play Josh Shapiro speaking,
Yeah.
and 100% it's like, well, yo, folks, we need to do this, and like I was like, holy shit! Like,
Yep.
I had a whole running bit during the VP selection. I called him. Somebody else coined it. So it's not my invention. Baruch Obama, and he totally like, yeah, he's. I don't think it's an impression. I think it's how he talks, but it's just very funny to have that cadence coming from a man who like looks nothing like Obama.
looks a little bit different, yeah.
I'd love to take the mic back for a second and talk about the role of the audience. We talked a bit about like opening up and talking to a bigger crowd and how that might change the voice, open your thinking. But how do you, Armin and Richard, see the kind of participation in the language creation that comes from the audience? Do you learn from your commenters? Do you block them? Do you shape your message when you figure them out? How do the readers change you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's some like sometimes I'll learn if there are people who I respect a lot who have a lot of smart ideas and they really object to something. Sometimes I will listen to that. If some people who I maybe respect not so much have an idea, it will kind of polarize me against the idea. I think that's kind of rational. I mean, you are taking information about the world. If someone is wrong about 100% of things in the world, 100% of things they talk about, and then suddenly, they really like this one opinion. I'm like, wait a minute, maybe there's something. You don't want to overdo that. But that can be a kind of valuable heuristic. I am kind of conscious of who my readership is because it's kind of a strange audience because I don't really fit anywhere and. It's a diverse, politically very diverse audience. And, I think earlier I was maybe talking to right-wing people and trying to help them. I think that I became kind of maybe depressed about the possibility of helping them, of like making them see reason. I think that maybe some of them have, or maybe it's just diminishing returns. I've said kind of the important things that I need to say, and a lot of them have listened to me, and the ones who don't want to are not going to. And so, yeah, I mean, when you're talking to liberals, it's kind of a much larger kind of conversation. There's just a much larger literary culture, and sometimes I'm kind of interpreting conservative instincts to them and trying to help them kind of understand. I think the death penalty one is a big thing. I don't get, I don't get the anti-death penalty position. I just don't want to kill people. It's just very odd to me, and to a lot of liberals, probably the conservative position is kind of odd. And so that's the one I have. Although I don't have all these right-wing instincts. Many of them I don't. But when I do, it's kind of valuable to kind of spell it out and bring it forward to people and maybe try to help them understand.
Yeah. I'm actually curious about your audience. Like, during the Obama era, the axis around like Republican politics was basically around taxes and spending, right? Like you were more right wing if you like refused to raise taxes and if you refused to increase spending. Now the axis seems to be like, regardless of your specific policy views, it's like loyalty to Trump. And so there are people like within the Republican Party who are considered in better standing than you, who are like to your left on things. Like Matt Gaetz is like pro legalizing pot, and then there's like all these big things about antitrust. But you're like a fairly conservative person who's also like pretty anti-Trump specifically as the person. Have you retained any like MAGA readers? Do they still engage? Or is it they just like leave because like you were too mean to Trump?
So there is, there is. I think the thing that kind of holds kind of right-wing people together is the culture war stuff, the wokeness stuff. You look at like Washington Free Beacon, or even like the Free Press, which is not Manhattan Institute. These are, they're a really huge focus on culture war issues. They're much more obsessed with them than the left is on average. So as long as like I'm kind of right wing on these issues, they'll listen to me. I think there's kind of diminishing returns again to talking about that. I wrote a book about civil rights law. I said a lot of things that I wanted to say. I had these cultural analysis, and maybe like it's become a point where that's really not the glue anymore, because in a lot of ways, kind of the tide is turning on wokeness, and a lot of the things that can be done through policy have been done in the Trump administration, or in the process of being done. And now, so it's like that was like what held, it's like kind of the Cold War, like held conservatism together in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Like the collapse of wokeness is kind of the same thing. And and so you do have these people who are just trying to kind of, you're right that like it's loyalty to Trump, but it's not even like you can hate Trump personally, but you have to be just loyal to the right, the right in the culture war. That's like the kind of thing. It's like you have to hate the media enough. And you're right, you can have any kind of position you want and be in good standing, as long as you're, anti-woke and you hate the right people, it's okay. And this is not something like, I care about ideas. So this is not something that's like comfortable for me as like an environment. Like, okay, I hate Trump. I think he's like the worst person ever. I think the libs are right up him about, right about him on everything. And January 6th was a coup attempt, and, he should have been in prison for that and all that. And it's like, this to me is just like a basic integrity issue at that point, because it's just like, so obvious like what this man is like. And so yeah, it's kind of like I don't know, like the people who actually care about Trump and only care about kind of owning the libs, I think those people are gone, and I'm trying to kind of build something else. But like if I build something else, like it's, they might just end up going to the left, because there's not much room for you on the right. There's room for you. You can put your head down, get a job in the administration, or get a job in the think tank. Maybe, be the next generation of change within the conservative movement. Once Trump is gone, the people who follow me are not going to be public intellectuals, because that's not where the audience is on the right. If they want to talk to an audience, they'd have to talk to a centrist or a left-wing audience. So I guess that's where I'm reaching people on the right. I'm reaching people who are going to take my ideas and like look at the around themselves and say, this is kind of crazy, but maybe I can play a positive role here. Or people who are going to go participate in discourse, in which case they can maybe nibble around the edges of conservatism, but otherwise talk to other people.
The wokeness executive, the anti-DI executive order seemed to reflect a lot of like what you wrote in the book. Was there like a more formal tie? Like, were you in discussions with anybody, or is it just like your general ideas reach to sort of people who care about that?
I was on Project 2025. I talked to people on the administration. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They told me to submit executive orders, drafts. They ended up doing, what they wanted to do. Yeah, it wasn't that. I mean, it was, there was communication, but it wasn't like I was writing what Trump actually ended up signing.
Kind of close the conversation, my outro question. This is something that constantly fascinates me, because it's not just the language around us that's changing, and with it, the work of the commentator class, but it is also reality, right? And I always wonder whether writers like yourselves have something where there's something that's bugging you, there's something that you're sensing, something new or something old that is gone, but you can't really talk about it because there's no way to talk about it yet. There are no words yet. Are there any vibes that you somehow can't express? And if so, let's do it now.
Vibes I can't express. Yeah, I don't know. I spend most of my days expressing the vibes. I don't know. I think there's probably like, you're just kind of you just see such a small part of the culture. I'm sure there's things that I was looking at the pedophile hunter. There was a story about the pedophile hunters in the New York Times. There's just all kinds of strange things that are kind of happening out there in the culture. You've got to be kind of young, but nobody can see, the whole thing anyway. But yeah, nothing really comes to mind. I don't know what I don't know.
I know in the past for me, like abundance is sort of this thing because I was one of the first like people that I saw online who was like very into YIMBY stuff, who was like really obsessed with like clean energy permitting reform. And I like saw in like the laws that people were writing, I was like, oh my God, they're like trying to write laws that are replicating how we decide to build housing in San Francisco for clean energy. I was like freaking out. I was like, oh God, like please no. And that like and then I was like really obsessed with like the transit project sort of cost efforts that were going on at NYU. And did not have an encompassing idea around it, but like I saw all these things as connected and I didn't see people talking about them as a similar thing until like but clearly like other people were thinking about it because then this book came out and other people were trying to do like abundance things. And so like I'm actually at this moment where like this idea that I felt like I saw and I did see the people put in different silos, but I saw it like all encompassing and connected and part of like a bigger philosophy is happening. In terms of like what the next thing is, like I don't know. I will say that this vocal moment is probably the biggest moment of uncertainty I've ever experienced in my life. Like we don't know, the White House itself doesn't know what massive economic tariffs is going to impose tomorrow. Like literally right now, they don't know, don't have a plan. So like we could be in a Great Depression tomorrow, and that's what all care about. It's really hard to be a prognosticator of anything these days.
Any last words? Anybody has any comment that we somehow didn't give space for yet? Now is your moment.
Not really, Anna. I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you so much, guys, for
Always
coming.
fun
And
talk.
I mean,
Always
they
fun
know
talking.
where you live. You both live on Twitter. So if somebody has something to say to you guys.
Substack is much better. Please subscribe to the Substack. If you don't like the Twitter, just the Substack is much, much more important. If when people just know me from the Substack, I'm sort of disappointed. Or people only know me from the Twitter, I tend to be disappointed in them. So yes, I write more substantive things than what I tweet.
Figure out which
Well,
one of which part of the audience you belong to. Are you a Twitter person for Hanania or are you a Substack person and vote accordingly? And Armand, you do live on Twitter, so you're not going
I'm
to.
only on Twitter, so at Armand Gemma, you know.
And I'm an
I have
intern
a
on
normal
Twitter and
job.
everywhere. Sorry?
I'm a normal person, I have a normal job, so it's kind of funny always to be on these things.
How do you tweet so much? Are you like 9 to 5? You go to an office and all that?
I work remote and I work very long hours, to be frank, like because I'm like I sometimes I get too distracted and so then I work late, but I always like get my shit done. So I'm flexible. My work is data analytics, and so I can be flexible when I get it done, and what hours I allocate. But definitely there are periods where like I'm tweeting too much and now I have to work super late at night and this was dumb.
We've all been there. Thank you so
Although
much.
most of my tweets happen when I'm walking my dog, so like
It's a good mindset for it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for the great questions, both via hand raising feature and in the chat. We also had some fun comments on Twitter. This was an experiment. We've never tried to debate anything on InterInsect before this much. And we also never really live tweeted a Zoom call on Twitter. So thank you so much for participating in this experiment. I think I'm going to do this some more because I learned so much. And now I have to go and read a bunch of things that you guys mentioned, which is always the best thing that can happen to you during an InterInsect salon. Armand, Richard, thank you so much for being generous with your time and your ideas and listening to people. This was a joy and to be continued. Take care.
Thanks, Armin. Thanks,
Thank you.
Anna. Good talking to you. Good seeing you.
Yeah.